The world watched in horror. The events of that day are forever etched in our collective memory. It was September 11th, 2001, a day that began like any other with the sun rising over a bustling New York City. Terrorists attacked the United States. The news broke and the world stood still, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the unfolding tragedy. They hijacked planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center in New York City. The iconic Twin Towers, symbols of American prosperity, were engulfed in flames and smoke. The Pentagon in Washington, D.C. was also hit. This attack on the heart of America's defense system sent shockwaves through the nation. A fourth plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. The brave passengers fought back, preventing further devastation. Nearly 3,000 people died. Each name etched in memorials represents a life cut short, a family forever changed. This tragic day changed America forever. The nation mourned, united in grief and resolve. It also changed the course of global politics. Leaders around the world convened to address the new reality of international terrorism. The attacks exposed America's vulnerability, security measures were heightened, and a sense of unease permeated daily life. They also revealed the threat of global terrorism. The world realized that no nation was immune to such acts of violence. The U.S., under President George W. Bush, vowed to respond. The government promised swift and decisive action. They promised to hunt down those responsible. Military and intelligence agencies mobilized, preparing for a new kind of warfare. The world mourned with America. Many countries offered support, standing in solidarity against the threat of terrorism. But the attacks also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. Debates raged about the best course of action, and the world braced for the repercussions. It marked the beginning of a new era in international relations. Policies and alliances shifted, reflecting the new global landscape. The world held its breath. The uncertainty of what would come next was palpable. The question wasn't if the U.S. would respond, but how. Strategies were debated, and the path forward was fraught with challenges. The answer would have profound and lasting consequences. The scars of 9/11 are still felt today, shaping our world in ways we continue to grapple with. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, President Bush gathered his advisors at Camp David. The atmosphere was tense. The weight of the nation rested on their shoulders. They faced a critical decision. How should America respond? The administration considered various options. Diplomatic solutions were briefly discussed. Ultimately, the decision was made to launch a war on terror. This war would target Al-Qaeda, the group responsible for 9/11, and its leader, Osama bin Laden. This decision marked a turning point in American foreign policy. It signaled a shift towards preemptive military action. The war on terror would have far-reaching implications. It would define the presidency of George W. Bush. It would also shape global politics for decades to come. The world braced itself for the storm that was to follow. On October 7, 2001, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom. American and British forces began airstrikes against targets in Afghanistan. The Taliban, who ruled Afghanistan, were harboring Osama bin Laden. They refused to hand him over. The initial military strategy focused on air power and supporting local Afghan groups. The Northern Alliance, opposed to the Taliban, became a key ally. Pakistan, under pressure from the U.S., also provided support. This cooperation was vital in the early stages of the war. It allowed the U.S. to topple the Taliban regime relatively quickly. However, the war in Afghanistan was far from over. Osama bin Laden remained at large. The Taliban, though weakened, continued to fight. The U.S. found itself drawn into a complex and protracted conflict. Section 4. The Mesopotamian Quagmire Invasion of Iraq. In 2003, the Bush administration shifted its focus to Iraq. The decision was driven by a complex mix of geopolitical strategy, post-9/11 security concerns, and a desire to reshape the Middle East. President George W. Bush and his advisors believed that removing Saddam Hussein from power would not only eliminate a potential threat, but also pave the way for democracy in the region. They claimed that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction. These claims were based on intelligence reports that suggested Iraq had continued its WMD programs despite international sanctions and inspections. The administration argued that these weapons could be used against the United States or its allies, or fall into the hands of terrorist groups. They argued that Iraq posed a threat to the United States and its allies. This narrative was used to build a coalition of willing nations to support the invasion. The Bush administration sought and received authorization from Congress to use military force, and they worked to convince the international community of the necessity of the invasion. This justification proved to be false. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no weapons of mass destruction were ever found in Iraq. The intelligence that had been used to justify the war was later revealed to be flawed and in some cases deliberately exaggerated. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found in Iraq. This revelation led to widespread criticism and accusations that the Bush administration had misled the public and the international community. The lack of WMDs undermined the primary rationale for the invasion and damaged the credibility of the United States on the world stage. Despite international opposition, the US-led coalition invaded Iraq in March 2003. The invasion was swift and overwhelming, with coalition forces quickly advancing through the country. Major cities fell one by one, and within weeks the capital city of Baghdad was under coalition control. The initial invasion was swift. Baghdad fell within weeks. Saddam Hussein's government collapsed. The images of Saddam's statues being toppled became symbolic of the regime's fall. However, the swift military victory was followed by a much more challenging and chaotic occupation. However, the US had underestimated the challenges of occupying Iraq. The power vacuum left by the fall of Saddam's regime led to widespread looting, lawlessness, and the rise of insurgent groups. The US military found itself unprepared for the complexities of nation-building in a deeply divided society. The country descended into chaos. Sectarian violence erupted. Sunni and Shia factions, along with Kurdish groups, vied for power, leading to brutal and bloody conflicts. The insurgency grew stronger, and terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda in Iraq gained a foothold, further destabilizing the region. The US found itself bogged down in a costly and increasingly unpopular war. The human and financial toll mounted, with thousands of American and coalition soldiers killed or wounded, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians affected. The war sparked widespread anti-war protests and deepened political divisions within the United States. The invasion of Iraq would prove to be a major strategic blunder. It strained U.S. relations with key allies, diverted resources from the war in Afghanistan, and contributed to regional instability. The long-term consequences of the invasion would be felt for years to come, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. It would have devastating consequences for Iraq, the Middle East, and the United States. The war left a legacy of destruction, displacement, and trauma. It also led to a reevaluation of U.S. foreign policy and military strategy as the nation grappled with the lessons learned from the conflict. Section 5. A world divided, global backlash, and the price of war. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a pivotal moment in modern history, one that would have far-reaching consequences across the globe. The invasion of Iraq sparked global outrage. People from all walks of life, from students to professionals, took to the streets to voice their dissent. The anti-war sentiment was palpable, and it transcended national boundaries. Millions protested in the streets of cities around the world. From New York to London, from Tokyo to Sydney, the message was clear. The world was united in its opposition to the war. These protests were some of the largest in history, showcasing a rare moment of global unity. The war further strained relations between the United States and its allies. Diplomatic ties were tested as leaders debated the justification and consequences of the invasion. Long-standing alliances were put under immense pressure, and the geopolitical landscape began to shift. Many questioned the legitimacy of the invasion. Legal experts, political analysts, and ordinary citizens alike debated whether the war was justified. The lack of clear evidence of weapons of mass destruction further fueled the controversy. They accused the U.S. of acting unilaterally and violating international law. The decision to invade without broad international support was seen as a breach of global norms, leading to widespread condemnation. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq came at a high cost. The human toll was staggering, with countless lives lost and communities devastated. The impact on the ground was profound, with cities left in ruins and families torn apart. Thousands of American soldiers lost their lives. Each loss was a tragedy, leaving behind grieving families and communities. The emotional and psychological toll on those who served and their loved ones was immense. Tens of thousands more were wounded. The physical and mental scars of war would last a lifetime for many veterans. Rehabilitation and reintegration into civilian life posed significant challenges. The financial cost of the wars soared into the trillions of dollars. The economic burden was felt not just by the US, but by the global economy. Resources that could have been used for development and social programs were diverted to fund the war efforts. The wars also took a toll on America's global standing. Criticism from world leaders and international media was relentless. The perception of the US as a global leader was severely damaged. The US was accused of hypocrisy and double standards. Critics pointed out the inconsistencies in American foreign policy, highlighting the gap between its stated values and its actions. Its image as a beacon of freedom and democracy was tarnished. The ideals that the US had long championed were called into question, leading to a crisis of credibility on the world stage. The prolonged conflicts in the Middle East had profound geopolitical implications. The power dynamics in the region shifted dramatically, with new alliances forming and old ones dissolving. They created a power vacuum that other actors were quick to fill. Non-state actors, regional powers, and global players all sought to capitalize on the instability, leading to further complexity and conflict in the region. Section 6. Rising Tides, the Shift in Global Power. The U.S. focus on the Middle East had unintended consequences. It allowed other global powers to emerge. China's economic and military might grew significantly during this period. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, reasserted itself on the world stage. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq had exposed the limits of American power. They had also strained the U.S. military and drained its resources. Other countries saw an opportunity to challenge American hegemony. The world was moving towards a more multipolar system. The U.S. could no longer dictate the terms of the international order. This shift in the global balance of power would have significant implications for the 21st century. It would lead to new alliances and rivalries. It would also create new challenges for the United States as it navigated a more complex and unpredictable world.